Wow.
And I would go over there and we'd set up the screen and the projector and get the popcorn and watch all 20 minutes. And some people would probably prefer that version. But
well, it's only one shot of Beeger flying over Beeger.
But this was the way you would watch films. Now, like people who are in the industry or people who had a lot of money would actually get prints and watch them in a screening room. If you were kids in high school like we were, you would, and it was quite a business.
Junior high.
You could sometimes get 16 millimeter prints for your school.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Right. You could get 16 millimeter, but generally, so my friend Steven would have these Super 8s. They usually would be 200 foot or 400 foot.
400.
400, and then it would either be one or two, and you'd have to do a real change.
Right.
Catch the cigarette burns.
And you'd watch it on Super 8, and that was how we experienced those movies. And again, I remember it was Star Wars, Empire, and it was great. It was like all the boring parts cut out.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks to Mr. Spock's timely arrival, we've been able to establish warp drive.
and so that was my first experience. My first experience actually seeing the Betamax version. I talked about it, I think, on our first episode. I was at Willoughby's, which was a store next to Macy's on 34th and Herald Square in New York.
That's the
next stop, yeah. And I remember looking at this new thing called the Betamax, where you could play movies at home, complete movies, and in this glass case was this $129 tape for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I'm like, I have to have this. Now, I didn't have it because my parents weren't buying me a Betamax and $100 movie, but I was like,
oh my God.
It changed everything. You say, oh, it changed everything. It's like, you're going to be able to watch movies at home? Star Trek? This is incredible.
I had that tape. I got it the day it came out for my bar mitzvah, 1980. My grandfather had a furniture store, Schoenfeld's Furniture in Tacoma, and it was 10 stories, and so one story was electronics. For my bar mitzvah, all I wanted was a VCR. My rich friend Jimmy Fiddler had one. They had a bootleg tape of Star Wars. I had to have one. I didn't know anyone who had one. So we were the first people that had a VCR on our block, and back then there was very few movies out. Paramount Home Video, I don't think had much out at all yet. This is May of 1980. And it was, you'd walk into these stores and these movies, like you just said, each one was like the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
You would
like
hold on to it.
6 movies, right?
I mean, I remember the day that MCA Home Video, we got a box in it. There was like Earthquake and Smokey and the Bandit. I'd seen these movies on Laserdisc in 78.
Yeah.
But they hadn't come out on tape yet.
Yeah.
And it was...
But they had come out on Selectavision.
Yeah, people hadn't, they didn't understand. It didn't exist.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people, when they got their access to their first VHS or Betamax recording machine and had blank tape, rather than buying pre-recorded stuff, you were recording stuff off air, right?
Sure.
So when Star Trek was syndicated, like I had a whole collection of like Betamax episodes, right?
And those tapes were $30 a pop.
Oh, I know. It was so expensive. And it was like, I remember, I think I probably had Star Trek: The Motion Picture off air before I had it was on the ABC Sunday Night Movie, and it was that expanded edition. Right. And I had like a pause. Like it was a wired pause button.
Yeah.
So like literally there would be the act out before the commercial, and pause, and then it would come back, pause, and it was like, so I had this seamless version, and then they did the.
I'm sure you, like me, got really good at anticipating when the commercials were
totally.
over.
Yeah. It was like seamless, and it was like the same thing. It was like, to be continued, and it was. I remember the thing I was proudest of in my life was on Superman. It was like they cut in the middle of the helicopter rescue. I remember to this day. It was like dun 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 dun, and he stops, right, and then it's like the continuation of him rescuing Lois. I got that edit so perfect. It was like you couldn't tell it was 2 different nights. It was like Superman flying,
I went. I got a paper route only to buy blank video cassettes because my parents wouldn't give them to me. And on my birthday and for the holidays, I would get a box of 10.
And they weren't cheap. Blank tapes were not cheap.
They were not cheap.
All.
Like TDK, I had TDKs or Maxells. If my parents would give me Ampex videotape, I'm like, oh no, you got to take.
Oh no, you got to get the chrome oxide.
I need.
You got to get the metallic.
And did you do it on 6-hour or 2-hour mode?
Well, it depended. Like when I was taping B movies off Showtime, it would be 6 hours because I would get 3 on a tape.
Right, yeah.
But Star Trek, It would be 2 hours.
Pristine, man.
Better quality.
But then, my parents, they didn't understand.
NTSC analog, baby.
But it's so funny because I got a job at a video store because I would get a discount on buying blank tape.
Yeah.
And it was like, so because I was taping so much, like you said, the original Star Trek episodes, all the stuff. And then once I got cable, it was like every movie as though they would never be available again. Right.
But that you didn't know.
Yeah.
Because it was new. And James Bond movies on the ABC Sunday movie.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is at that time, I grew up in rural North Dakota, so we had 3 channels, plus, when cable came around, then there was like Cinemax and stuff like that, but we had 3 channels, 3 networks, maybe PBS if we got it in that day, and maybe the CBC if we got it in with the rabbit ears that day. And there was 1 or 2 movie theaters in town, so like there was no art house cinema, the way I saw a lot of movies early on was like Cinemax or HBO, right? Full frame and
the glories of 133.
Yeah, and that was it. That was the window on the world for a long time.
Yeah. But you know what? It made us the people we are today. I mean, just obsessed with movies and television, and I mean, we worked harder for content back then.
Well,
right?
It was a job. Like if you had to get things on TV, do you remember scouring the TV guide? The TV guide would come out on a Wednesday. My mom would bring it home in the grocery bag, and I would go late night and see which movies I would record off. You'd circle off the thing, and my mom just thought it was so weird that I'm like, did you get the TV guide? Like it was like a drug addict getting
the Sunday night movie. You got to find out what the Sunday night movie is.
I haven't thought about that in 30 years, but God, that feeling of like getting your mom would come home with the groceries, and then you take the TV guide. It's like, can I have a TV guide? Thanks, Mom. And you'd sit there and start figuring out what you were going to tape that.
Well, people now don't really realize, but at the time they used to run like Wizard of Oz and Star Wars. They'd run once a year.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to see them, man, that was it. And everybody like had to come home and watch that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have a blank tape and I was short $20, my parents weren't going to give me an extra $20 to buy a blank tape. I mean,
you had to make some hard decisions.
Yeah, you had to, it was like, what am I going to tape over?
I forgot.
Well, what can I sacrifice?
Star Trek 3.
Yeah, but I mean, the funny thing is that also when Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out, and it was the ABC, that TV version.
That was '83 that came out. The network.
And it cost $100.
Yeah,
it was before there was sell through tapes.
Yeah,
and that was a lot of money. And as a kid. It still is, but you're like, that was a problem. You know how many papers I had to deliver to buy that tape?
What I would do is sometimes if you would go to your local rental store,
Grit magazine,
they would have, because obviously they would buy the rental copies so they could rent out to people. But then when those copies got worn out, or slightly worn out, they would sell them for less money. So you could maybe for $40 you could
I didn't find it as much as being worn out as like they would buy a ton when it was a new release, and then as demand started to wane,
they wanted to get as much money as they could.
Would then sell the used,
recoup their loss,
the used copies and stuff. But that all changed dramatically in 1983 when Paramount released Star Trek II and Officer and Gentleman at popular prices, $39.95. And I remember the day that went on sale, the March, and I went to a couple of video stores.